So today we'll try and build a generative patch from scratch that will play itself. So all we need to do is hit a button that will start a patch, then the patch will run with different sections and it will end also by itself. And since it's generative, each time you hit the start button, it will sound different with a different scale, different length, and so on. Now this will be somewhat a longer video, but there are timestamp links in the description so you can skip around. And for this, let's start with the start button. And already I will mention that I will use only 3 available modules, so all of you can follow along. And this button module will be the manual gate from count modular that will look like this. By the way, the patch itself we will build from scratch, but I already have here, as always, the mind meld mixer with the send reverb, and I will also use color coding. So I have here the cable color key module from Inclan, right? So I can quickly switch between the cable colors, right? So let's go back to this manual gate module, right? So the first voice I want to have is a burst of notes. So we will use the burst generator also from count modular. I will set the pulses for now all the way to 16. So we get 16 notes. And the voice we will use will be the sine VCO from Surge. I already have it set to unison of 2 voices, so we have some movement. And in the right-click menu, I also have already drift set, so it will drift also in pitch a bit. Now I would like to send it also through a VCA, so I will use the Surge VCA and envelope generator. This is a relatively new module, right? So I will send the left and the right to the VCA and from there to the mixer. So with this VCA, we have already also an envelope generator built in, right? So now if I send the pulses output, and gates will be blue, the pulses output to the gate input of the VCA, right? And I will start the burst generator also with the manual trigger output here from the manual gate, right? I can change the rate. Right, we get a burst of, in this case, 16 pulses, 16 gates or 16 triggers. Now, first of all, what I want to do is start adding some modulation. So for this, I will use the sample and hold, maybe make this here, the sample and hold from Bog Audio. Right, I will use the pulses output to trigger. If I hold control, I can take another copy of this cable to trigger also the sample and hold. And I will change its range, right, in the right-click menu to be negative or positive negative 5 volts. So we get a bipolar modulation source. And I will use it once to modulate the rate of the pulses, right? We have here a CV input with an attenuverter. I can open the modulation a bit, right? So we get some movement to the rate with each pulse. And once it will also modulate the number of pulses. So we have again a bipolar modulation. If I take this to 12, let's say, and I will open the modulation a bit. Now we will get also a different number of pulses. And for this lower sample and hold, I will use actually the start trigger output, right? So every time we start the patch, we hit start, we will get a different number of pulses. Sometimes it will be 16, sometimes it will be 7, and so on, right? So now when I start a patch, right? If I start it now, it will sound a bit different. It will have also a different length. Right, something like this. Maybe we can take the rate a bit down even. By the way, if you're not familiar with sample and hold, or you feel that you need more support or just want to dig deeper, there's a link in the description to various courses I have on synthesis in the modular environment. So of course, there's a link in the description if you are interested. Now I would like to add also pitch variation to this voice, and also here we will use sample and hold, right? Again, the one from Bog Audio. Again, I will trigger it with the pulses output from the burst generator. And in this case, I will set it to negative, positive 1 volt. So it will fit better pitch information, right? We have 1 volt per octave. So here we have one negative volt, 1 positive volt. We have 2 volts all in all. So we have 2 octaves. It will fit the range of pitch information better. And in any case, I would like also to quantize this pitch to a scale. So for this, I will use the scale CV module from Aaron static, right? I will send the sample and hold as pitch information. Pitch will be yellow through the quantizer to the sine VCO, and I will use the lower output of the sample and hold to modulate the root note, right? So each time we start the patch, we will get a different root note, and also here I will use the start button here to trigger this sample and hold. So again, we start the patch, we have a different length of burst. Each trigger will have a different length as well. We will have also a different scale. And I will use the other sample and hold from before to modulate the mode. So we will get also a different mode or a different scale as well. Right, I will take this from the lower one, which is also triggered from the start button. This will go to the mode input. Again, we have here bipolar modulation. So maybe I will bring this to the center here. So now it will go left and right. Already you can see we have a different mode. We have in this case C Phrygian. Right, so now if we start the patch, we should get also pitch, and each time it will be different. So now when I click, we have A sharp Locrian. Right, again, in different rates, in different lengths. If I click this again, B Mixolydian. Very nice. Now I would also like to add movement to the timbre of this voice and to the envelope, right? I will use another sample and hold. This is VC eurorack. We can have as many sample and holds as we want. Again, I will trigger it with the pulses output from the burst generator. It will once modulate the feedback on the sine VCO. This will change the timbre. And let's say once it will modulate the decay, and maybe also the release, and maybe also the attack, right? So we have a different envelope with each and every pulse. Right, let's test this once again. Let's see which scale we will get now. Now, before we move on, let's add a nice delay to this voice so it will slowly fade out, and of course some reverb. So for this, I will use the lovely Chronoblob 2, right? I will send after the VCA, this will go to the delay, right? And I will add also some reverb. Maybe I will change the delay times to be a bit longer, right? And also change the left and right from one another. Right, maybe have a bit more fade out, a bit more feedback, so it will decay longer. And let's have a listen to this now. Right, so now slowly this burst of notes will fade out. Maybe I can add a bit more modulation here on the feedback. Very nice. Now, by the way, I could also trigger the patch from the burst generator. It has also a manual button here, right? But you will see soon enough that there will be cables everywhere, and it's easier just to place this start button somewhere safe, somewhere remote, and just start the patch from there. Now, for the next voice, I would like to have a recording of this burst of notes, but play it back in reverse and an octave down. And for this, we will use, of course, Simpliciter from Nischi. And now, before I send the audio to the input of Simpliciter, I want to make sure there will be no clicks, right? No all sorts of different clicky noises when it's recording. So I will use the fade module, which will look like this from count module as well. I will send a copy after the delay, so it will capture also the delay signal to the fade module. From there to Simpliciter, I will already send this to another input on the mixer, another channel here, right? Something like this. Now I will set the fade in and out for, let's say, about a second. So it will take it about a second to fade in and also about a second to fade out. And I will use the duration output from the burst generator, right? This output here, this output will output a gate as long as the burst generator is active, right? So as long as it's active, as long as this first voice is playing, the fade in will fade in the audio, and then when it's done playing, it will fade it out, right? And it will take about 1 second to fade in and 1 second to fade out. Right, and now for activating the recording on Simpliciter, I will use the trigger output here on the fade module. Now this is a special trigger output because it will output a trigger whenever the fade in starts and when the fade out stops, which means it will always send out a trigger when there is silence. So if I use this to trigger the recording on Simpliciter, Simpliciter will always start recording in silence and stop recording in silence, so we will get no clicks. Now on Simpliciter, I would also like to deactivate the sound on sound, this SOS here, so it will record only the incoming audio and not what's already playing. Right, I will set it to play an octave down. Maybe I will zoom in a bit here. I can set it to play an octave down, and if I take this speed knob to -1, if I just hit -1, it will play it also in reverse. Let's already add some reverb to this. This will be channel 2, I believe. And let's see how this will work, right? So I will hit again the start button. Let's put it here. I will hit again the start button. This burst will start. As it starts, it will fade in this second voice into Simpliciter, which will start recording it. The burst will end. It will fade it out, and Simpliciter will stop recording again on silence. So let's have a listen to this, and then of course it will play it back in reverse and an octave down. Let's see. Right? Just like this. Again, thanks to the delay, the first voice will fade out slowly, but we have Simpliciter, right? Continue to play this recording again in reverse and an octave down. Right, so we have this loop. Okay, for now I will delete this, right? If I right click it, I can delete the selection, and I will also disconnect for a second the recording here, just for the next time we trigger everything, so it will not always record and we will not always have to delete this sample or this loop. So now we have this bass loop, this bass voice that will also play something else according to the length of the burst, the rate of the burst, the scale, and so on. Now when the burst ends, I would like to add another voice. So I would like another voice to come in, and it will be a sequence that will be somewhat repetitive and somewhat with variation, and it will play for a certain amount of time. So let's start with the voice itself. I will use, for simplicity's sake, I will use the FM operator, and for the sequencer, I will use the sec3. Now the sec3 might look like a simple sequencer, but there's a lot of potential here. So first of all, I will use row 1 for pitch. So again, it will go through the quantizer CV1, a yellow cable because it's pitch information, through the quantizer to the FM operator. Right, this again will make sure that everything will stay in the same scale or mode. I will use the trigger output to trigger or to gate, actually in this case, the FM operator. In the right-click menu of the sec3, I have it set to clock pass-through, which means that it will actually output gates in this case. Right, let's already listen to this and add already, of course, some reverb. Right, I will change the pitch. Something like this. And again, in this case, it will be F Lydian. Next time we start the patch here, it will be a different scale or a different mode. Right, so first of all, I would like to add variation to this pitch. So for this, I will use the sample and hold, the super sample and hold, also from count modula. I will trigger it with the gate output of the first step, this one here, of the sec3, right? So with each cycle, the sample and hold will be triggered. Right, and now we'll use a mixer to mix this sample and hold together with the pitch information, and this I will do before the quantizer. We'll use this mix module from VCV. Right, so the sequence will go to the mixer, this will go back to the quantizer. Right, and maybe I will move this here, and now the sample and hold, I can take the level a bit down, so again, so it will fit pitch information, and the output will go to the mixer. So now what will happen, the sample and hold with each cycle, it will transpose this sequence and will change it. Right, so it will not always play the same 8 notes. Right, I can add also some probability here to the sample and hold. Right, so not every cycle it will transpose the sequence, but every now and then, again, we add more variation in a generative way. And now let's add more variation to the sec3, so each time we start the patch we will get different results. For this I will use another sample and hold from Bog Audio. Right? Again I will set it to negative positive 5 volts, so we have a bipolar modulation source. I will use again the start button to trigger it, so every time we start the patch we get a different value. And once it will change the number of steps with the CV input here, so if I take this, let's say to 6, right, this will change the number of steps. Sometimes it will be 6, sometimes 5, sometimes 8, and it will also change the tempo, so the rate of this sequence. Right, sometimes this sequence will be quicker or faster, sometimes it will be slower. Every time you start the patch you will get a different result. Right, I will also use another sample and hold to modulate the FM operator. Right, again I will use the triggers from the sequencer, and once it will modulate the feedback, once it will modulate the sustain. I have to change again the range or make sure that it's 0 opalach, that it's 0 to 10 volts, right? In this case I want unipolar modulation. And now as soon as you connect something, this is in most of the Bog Audio modules, as soon as you connect something to the CV input, the respective knobs become attenuators, right? So the sustain will go all the way up and the feedback a bit. So now we have also variation in timbre and in the overall sound, right, of this voice. Right, now I want this voice to come in and out only at certain times. So we will use the counter from Count Modular. This is the countdown 3. There is another version that you can use that can allow you longer sequences. Right, but basically we will use this counter. We can set the amount of triggers, so amount of time. Right, for this demonstration I will set it to 30, but feel free to set it to something longer, so the patch will run longer. Right, but in this case I don't want to wait so long. So now I will use the clock from the sec3 to clock this counter. Right, so again, since every time you start the patch, the sequencer will have a different rate, also the counter will have a different rate, right? So every time you start the patch, you get a different results, or a different result. Right, and now to fade this in and out, I will use another fade module, right? And this will fade in and out the FM operator. Right, now the end of cycle trigger output, this one here, from the pulses module will output a trigger whenever the pulses end, basically. So the first voice will end, and then I want the second voice, this FM operator, to come in, right? So this will trigger the fade module, right? This will start the fade in, and it will also trigger the counter. So the pulses will end, and the counter will start to count down 30 triggers. Right, I need also to change the mode on the fade module. If I change this, the control input mode to start and stop triggers, every time it gets a trigger, one trigger, it will start. another trigger, it will fade it out. So one trigger will fade in, one trigger will fade out. And now this is not enough because for now the counter is still not doing anything, right? It's not connected to anything. And we need to combine this trigger with the end of cycle of the burst generator, right? So the burst generator will trigger the fade in, and the counter will count 30 triggers and will trigger the fade out. Right, for this I will just use the VCV mixer, which will look like this once again. You can also use Boolean logic, but since they will never happen really at the same time, we can make things simpler and just use a mixer. Right, so again, the end of cycle from the pulses module will be mixed to fade this in, and the end of cycle, the end of trigger will be mixed together. So the end of cycle from the pulses will fade this in, and the end of cycle from the counter will fade it out. Now, whenever the countdown, the counter here will end, there is a need to reset it. So every time you start the patch, it will reset. We can do this simply just by sending the end of cycle to the reset input. So it will count 30 triggers and then it will automatically reset it. So next time you start the patch, everything will be ready for you. So now let's test this, right? So again, this is what will happen. There will be a burst of notes, then Simpliciter will play some of the burst in reverse and an octave down. Although now I have it disconnected, so we don't have to wait for it and we don't have to delete it later. And the second voice will come in, will count 30 triggers and will fade out. So let's have a listen to this, right? Simpliciter now will not work on purpose. Here comes the sequence, with a slow sequence in this case. It's counting. And now it will fade out. Right? And still the first voice is fading out from the delay. Maybe I can change here the fade in and fade out time. So maybe here we'll have 4 seconds and fade out, let's say about 6 or 7. Right, so we already have 2 voices. One more thing I want to add to this FM voice is some panning modulation with the LLFO from Bog Audio. Just send this to the mixer itself, to the pan CV input, right? Just so we have some movement also. So we have some movement also in the stereo field. Okay, so now I want that after some time that this sequence is playing and then it's fading out, I want another voice to come in. And actually it will be the same voice, but just a processed version of it. So I will use another delay, another chronoblob. I will send a copy of this voice after the fade module to the chronoblob delay. Right, I will set it to be fully wet so we don't get a dry signal twice. And I would like it also to decay very slowly, right? So it will continue all along until the patch ends. Right, so I will set it to about, you can set it to 98 maybe. I will go with the 94, let's say. Right, I will sync this with the sec3. I will set different delay times for the left and right, maybe something a bit shorter, maybe something like this, let's say. And now this will go to 2 different low pass filters, 2 tangents in parallel. So one and another one. Now with the filters, we will add movement to the sound. And since we have 2, we will have also movement in the stereo field. Again, I will use the sample and hold from Bog Audio. I will use it to modulate the filters. So again, negative, positive 5 volts. This will go to 1 and 2, right? Let's do something like this maybe. Just set them a bit differently from one another. And again, I will use the first gate output from the sequencer to trigger this sample and hold, right? So each cycle will be a bit different. Right, and I want this modulation from the sample and hold to be smooth, right? So it's not jumping around here. In the right-click menu, if I add glide to this, it will turn this to a smooth random voltage. And now again, to bring this voice in, I will use another fade module, right? So this will be from the filter or the filters, and this will go to the mixer, right? I can already add some reverb, right? Something like this, right? And this fade module, I will trigger with the end of cycle from the counter, right? Again, I have to change the mode to start stop triggers, right? So the counter will end, it will fade out this first voice, but since we have a copy of it going to the delay that is set with quite high feedback, it will decay by itself and the filters will add movement to it, right? Let's set, for example, a fade in of, let's go with 10 seconds. Right, I will take also some of the low frequencies a bit out here from the mixer itself. In the right-click menu, I can have a high-pass filter, right, just so it's not too muddy. And now let's try this. Again, Simpliciter is not connected for now on purpose, just so we don't have to delete the sample all the time. So let's have a listen. Again, we have a burst of notes, we have a sequence, and then this process delay sound will come in. Let's have a listen. D sharp for now. The sequence is quite slow. The first voice is fading out, right? 10 more triggers. And then when the counter ends here, this delayed voice should come in. It will take it about 10 seconds to fade in. And again, the filters will change with each cycle, just like now. Right, so we have nice movement. I think that I will change the tempo here of the sequence a bit, take it up just so it's not too slow all the time. But of course, you can fine tune everything. For now, I will fade this out, right? And we can continue with the patch. Okay, so now while this is going on, right, we have the fade out from the delay, the fade out from the sequencer and everything. I want to have some chords. So for this, I will use another module from Aaron Static. This will be the diatonic CV. This module will work together with the scale CV module and will generate chords, right? So if I take the scale out from the scale CV, and I connect this to the scale in from the diatonic CV, you see we have here D sharp. So now all of the chords will be in the D sharp scale, so it will automatically connect to the scale from the other module. Now for the voice itself, I will use the wavetable VCO also from Surge. Right, I will connect the chord output. This will be polyphonic because we have chords now. I will choose a different wavetable. I will go with the Waldorf B3 waves, right? You can choose other wavetables, of course, if you like. I will use also the Surge filter, right? I will already connect this to the mixer. And again, add a nice amount of reverb. Right, something like this. Maybe I will take the gain of the filter a bit down. And now let's already add movement to the VCO and the filter. For this, I will use caudal from Volt. This will output basically smooth random voltages. Right, so I can modulate once, of course, the morph of the wavetable. I can modulate once the saturation here a bit, just to change the sound, right? And two more, one for the skew. and one for the other skew, right? So we have some movement and another one for the filter itself, right? So the filter will open and close, right? Something like this, and we can make this also slower, right? So we have some movement. Now what I want to do is I want it only when the filter closes, only when the sound is dark, when maybe we will not hear it, only then I would like to have a change in chord, right? So again, the sound will be dark, the filter will close, and then I would like a change in chord. Now it's a bit tricky to do, but pause the video and try to think how you can do something like this, since caudal is a so-called random, how to extract its voltage to use for changing chords only when it closes the filter. So for this, I will use a comparator, right? I will use the one from VCV. Now again, it's a bit complex, but not really. Basically, a comparator will compare two signals. In our case, one of them will be the same signal from caudal that we are using to modulate the filter. I just hold control and then take another copy, right? So this now is the same signal that is controlling the filter. And the second signal will be a threshold that we can set here. Right now, the way that we have the filter modulation set, negative voltage from caudal will close the filter. So if we set the threshold to a negative value, right, we will get a gate whenever the signal from caudal goes below this value. So basically when the filter closes, and that's exactly what we want. So if I go with about, let's say 3 volts, negative 3 volts, right, we can use this to gate or to trigger another sample and hold that will change the chord and the chord type. So let's set this up. I will use again another sample and hold from Bog Audio. Right, and I will use the A lower than B output. This means that whenever the signal from caudal is lower than, in this case, negative 3.3 volts, this means that when the filter is closed, then we will get a gate that will gate or trigger the sample and hold that will modulate the chord and the chord type. Right? Maybe set this to negative 4 even. So when the filter is really closed, let's wait for it. Right? Just like this, the filter closes, we get a gate that we can use to change the chord and the chord type, if it's a 7th chord, a 9th chord, and so on and so forth. So now once again, we will use a fade module to control the amplitude to bring this voice in and out. Right, another one. Again, I will set things up. This module is also polyphonic, so it will work also with the chords. Again, we will use a counter, this one here. Again, just for this example, maybe I will set it to, let's say, 15 triggers, but please set it to something longer so the patch will run for a longer time. Again, I will mix two signals, so I will need a mixer. I will use the end of cycle from the first counter, so when it will end, it will trigger the fade in, and the end of cycle from the second counter, so when it will end the 15 triggers, it will fade it out. Again, I have to change the mode to start stop triggers. Right, so both of them now will trigger the fade module. The first counter will trigger the fade in, and the second counter will fade out. Right, again, let's set fade times. Let's say here 5 seconds, and here let's say 8 seconds. Now we will also need a clock for this second counter, and also this one I would like to be generative. So let's quickly set something with an LFO and random voltages. So again, I will use the LFO from Bog Audio, and I will use also walk. Walk will output also smooth random voltages. If I send walk to the volt per octave input of the LFO, this is basically the frequency, basically the rate. I can take the scale a bit down. Right, so now we will have also a generative clock. I will use square waves or pulse waves from the LFO, and the LFO will always move because again we have smooth random voltages modulating it. So this will go to the opalach to the clock input, right? The end of cycle of the same counter will go to the reset, so it will always reset itself. And the first counter will trigger the second counter. So again, this second voice will end and these chords will slowly come in. So now again, let's test this. Again, Simpliciter on purpose will not work because I have it disconnected, but let's have a listen. So we have the burst of notes. Oh, the sequencer was really quick this time, but here come the chords. Now they will fade out. Right, so again, in this case, the sequencer, you can see it's running really quickly. Please fine-tune this so you can get good results. And now I can go on and on like this, but I think you got the point with the fade and the counter. But there are two things I would like to add. So first of all, I would like to add more texture with noise. So I will use the noise module. Let's make some space here. The noise module from VCV. Right, I will send it first through a high-pass filter. Again, I will use tangents. White noise through a high-pass filter and open the filter quite a bit so we don't get any low frequencies. Then I will send this to another tangents, in this case low pass, and this will bring this in and out. And then this will go to two bandpass filters to have movement in timbre and panning as well, right? So two more filters, 1 and 2. This will go to the mixer left and right, and I will add already a nice amount of reverb here, right? And again, we can use caudal to add movement and modulation to the low pass and to the band pass filters, right? So one output will go to the low pass, right? And then two more to the band pass filters, right? To have movement there. Maybe add some resonance just a bit, right? So we have some texture. And another thing that is missing is fade out to the voices that are left, so Simpliciter and the noise. For this, again, I will add a fade module. So I will add a fade module. Also this, by the way, we have to reset. Okay, so I will add a fade module to Simpliciter, right? And already I will connect the trigger here again to the record. So next time we trigger everything, it will also record, hopefully. Right, and another fade module. I have to change here already the start and stop triggers. I will just duplicate this, and this will be for the noise. Right, so the noise will also fade in and out. Now for the Simpliciter voice, I would like it to come in directly with the patch when it starts, since it will anyway wait for the recording and will not play directly. So let's mix again with the mixer, the trigger from the start module itself. Right, again, triggers are blue. And the end of cycle of the counter for the chords, right? So it will end, the chords will fade out, and also everything else will start slowly to fade out. Let's fade this again out for, let's say, 10 seconds, right? So it will take a bit. And for the noise, I would like it to come in only after the first sequence, right? So in this case, again, I will use the mixer, and I will mix the end of cycle of the first counter, right, the first one for the sequence, and again with the end of cycle of the counter of the chords module, right, and again let's have this, let's say 6 seconds, and fade in about, let's say 4.5. And that's it. I will now let it run just so we can see the different stages, fine-tune everything, change the counter times. Again, each time you start it, it will be different, with a different length, with different scale, a different mode, and so on. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please share your results with me. Cheers.